And good evening, everybody. Welcome, not even back, welcome to the first Hoops HD Bracket Rundown show of the season. I am your host, Chad Sherwood. We've got a panel of three to join me tonight. We've got John Stalika, John Titel, and well, we were supposed to have David Griggs down there, but apparently he's been indefinitely suspended, which means that he's back.
Which means that I'm still here. Just because I'm suspended doesn't mean I can't still be here.
But this is our bracket rundown show that we begin doing every year around January. We're going to do a version of this in one form or another, probably on an almost weekly basis for the rest of the season. And just briefly to let you know what we're going to be doing here is we are going to actually be building a 1 through 50-ish or 1 through the end of the at-large bids seed list. Live right now, debated out between the four of us and teams chosen. I'm going to be serving as kind of the arbitrator, final decision maker when the other three do not agree. But David, can you tell us what a seed list actually is?
It's essentially a ranking of it's what the selection committee puts together. They put it together a line at a time or 4 teams at a time, and it's essentially 68 teams in the tournament. It's a ranking of 1 through 68.
Okay, but when this selection committee actually meets, what they do is 2 steps. The first 2 steps they do actually is actually choosing the teams and then ranking them on this type of seed list before the final step of bracketing them. And we're going to kind of do the first 2 steps combined here at one. We'll both be selecting the teams and ranking them. And as I've pulled up the list here, you can see we've got 68 spots here. We're only going to go through the end of the at-large bids in this show. We're going to have an under-the-radar show that you can probably find somewhere down there on the website that's going to go through the rest of the stuff that'll be posted later. And we'll probably do a bracket of this as well, right, David?
Yep.
Okay.
Now, I've noticed there's one slightly different thing from the seed list we've used last year. What are these 2 columns that you've added, Chad?
Oh, okay, yeah. This was just to try to help us with some of the debating. As we type teams in, their current RPI and KenPom ratings will be popping up on the screen. So if we see that something looks way out of whack, we can kind of look back and see if we want to make some adjustments. And you'll also see there's going to be an automatic tracker down here in the bottom left corner of how many at-large bids are left. When that hits 0, we're done. Obviously, the first team in is going to be assumed to be the automatic bid winner from that conference, so that won't detract. It's going to be when we hit a second and third team from the conference that we've already had at least one team in from. But if that's kind of explained the ground rules here, I guess we should get right to it. And let me start, John T., let me start with you. Who would be your 4-1 seeds right now as where we sit right here on January 5th?
So a couple of them are easy. I think even with Villanova's loss, their quality and body of work puts them on the 1 line.
Yes.
I like undefeated teams, so I'm easily slipping Baylor into the 1 line. As much as I want to put Gonzaga there too, because they've beaten a lot of power conference teams, but none who are amazing. I think I'm going to leave them off for now, and I'll go with the double K of Kansas and Kentucky.
Villanova, Baylor, Kansas, and Kentucky. David, let me turn to you here. And I think our debate may have been the one that John T. just mentioned, but let me start with those 4 teams. What do you feel about them as 1 seeds right now?
I agree with his overall number 1. Despite the loss, I have Villanova number 1. They've won at Creighton. They've won at Purdue. They've beaten Notre Dame on a neutral floor. That's a hell of a resume. Losing at Butler, who has not lost at home, is hardly a damaging loss, and it certainly doesn't offset all the good they have. So I agree with his overall number 1. I still have UCLA as the overall number 2. I love the win at Rupp Arena. I don't think anybody else in the country has a win or a singular win as impressive as that. And they only have 1 loss to Oregon at the buzzer, who is unbeaten at home. Baylor, another team I had on the 1 line, again, for the same reasons. John already talked about them, and Kentucky's my 4th overall number 1.
So you actually do not think Kansas is a 1 seed?
No. They're my overall – they're 5 overall on my seed list.
Okay.
But, yeah, I still have UCLA up there.
Well, Sleek, let me go to you and get your thoughts on it first before I go back to Titel and what might be our debate here, UCLA versus Kansas.
I might be the toughest grader among our crew, at least as far as Kentucky goes. I don't have them on my one line, but I do have Baylor as the overall number one. Villanova also on the one line, followed by UCLA and Kansas. I would have Gonzaga and Kentucky looking just outside the one line.
Well, making things easy here, Villanova and Baylor have been consensus by all three of you, so they're clearly in here. I heard 2 votes for Kansas, 2 votes for UCLA, and a vote for Kentucky also up here. John T., you're the one that had Kentucky. Do you want to defend why they're a 1 seed over UCLA?
I would love to. In terms of the wins, Michigan State, which 2 weeks ago was not looking like a great win, now is looking much more decent. Carolina, unfortunately, 2 weeks ago was looking like a great win, now a little less decent. A couple of SEC teams in Mississippi and Texas A&M. A very nice non-conference mid-major win against Valpo. And I agree, they lost to UCLA at home. So if it's as simple as that, then it is UCLA, but I don't think it's that simple. The Bruins are all offense, amazing offense, and deserve a ton of credit for the Kentucky win and deserve a little credit for a missed it by that much Oregon loss. So I'm not going to lose sleep if you put them in there, but I really think Kentucky's combination of offense and defense and non-conference play is enough to get them there. But if you put UCLA up there, I can live with that too.
Well, David, you also you had Kentucky in, I believe, but you were.
Yeah, I had Kentucky and UCLA.
Okay, you did have Kentucky, UCLA. Okay, Kansas, you think it's a 2-line though?
Yeah, and again, they're number 5 overall, so it's not like we're worlds apart here.
Okay,
But I just don't quite like them as much as Kentucky or UCLA.
all right. Oh, Stalika, you're the one that left Kentucky down. So let me go to you to make the case for Kentucky being up here over for Kentucky not being up here and Kansas and UCLA being in.
Well, UCLA's head-to-head win at Kentucky was one of the main reasons why I would have them up there. And I would also give Kansas a slight edge over Gonzaga because I think they're on top of what is a tougher conference in the Big 12 right now as opposed to the SEC.
Well, let me go back to – let's turn back to Kansas then. Let me turn back to Titel one more time. Why is Kansas above UCLA in your bracket?
On the first Friday of the season, Kansas lost at a neutral site by 4 to a good Indiana team in overtime. They have not lost a game since then, beating Duke and Nebraska and Davidson and TCU and Kansas State. What else do you want?
And as you can see on the screen here, I agree 100% with the Titel.
Oh, well, let's just agree with
I'm
Titel.
ignoring the puppet.
Just
I
because
do think
he was number 3 last year.
I do think enough solid arguments were made for UCLA, although we look right here. Even Ken Pom has UCLA 12th in the nation. He'd have them down in the 3 line right now. If we are going to fill out the 1 line there with Kansas and Kentucky, start the 2 line with UCLA. David, let me go to you here. And who else would be on the 2 line after, well, in your case, it would have been Kansas, but answer for Kansas and UCLA.
Gonzaga, who we've already mentioned, missing some like really thick meat, but undefeated and looking pretty well. And my next 2 are we're going to have a debate. I really like this Butler team. They just beat Villanova the other night. They also have the win away from home against Arizona. Also have a notable win. I think it's against Notre Dame, I think. So a really good profile for them. The one weakness that Butler has is true road games. They've struggled against teams that aren't even tournament caliber teams in true road games. So that might knock them, but the good on their profile is really good. And all the way up here, a 1-loss team that has a really good win at Virginia that I'm just really impressed with. I have Florida State all the way up at number 8 overall.
Okay. So you've got Gonzaga here, and then your other 2 on the sec 2 line would have been Butler and Florida State right now.
Yes.
Stalika, you want to tell us how crazy he is?
Well, it's not far-fetched to have Butler on the 2 line along with Gonzaga. And I was also going back and forth between whether to put West Virginia or even Florida State as my last number 2. But ultimately, I decided to go with West Virginia, given the difficulty of some of their wins that they've accomplished so far.
All right, so they both believe that Butler belongs a 2 seed. Titel, is Butler a 2 seed right now?
I think that's a recency pick based on a fantastic win over a previously undefeated and number 1 seed Villanova team. I have Butler a little lower, maybe a lot lower actually, but I think 2 is a bit much. I know that a lot of the ACC teams have had a heck of a week with upsets galore. I know Louisville has had a couple losses recently. I know that Duke got hammered at Virginia Tech without Allen. I think Butler needs to be off the 2 line, though. It was a great win, but that seems a little high to me.
Now, here's the case I would make for Butler, though. They have 5 wins against teams that I'm reasonably sure are going to be part of that Steve list, and that's Northwestern, Cincinnati, Villanova at home. And they've also beaten Arizona and Indiana on neutral floors. There's also 4 other games I would consider second-level wins, which would be at Utah, Vanderbilt on a neutral floor, and also pay attention to Bucknell and Providence, which are also nice wins. But I guess what's also souring John T. is you can't ignore losses at Indiana State and St. John's, which are about as bad as you're going to find up in protected seed territory here.
And that's why I had to pull this Butler profile up here, because I am completely shocked that both you, Salika, and David are both arguing Butler as a 2 seed when you were sitting here on January 5th, having already lost at St. John's and at Indiana State. You have 1 true road win on the profile there. It was at a sub-100 Utah team. Now, I'll grant you the Indiana win's a lot better than a 134 win, and they've got the neutral court win over Arizona as well, and a lot of great stuff at home. But, I mean, this might be a 4 or 5 seed profile easily, in my opinion. But David, how is this a 2 seed with those 2 horrible losses?
That would sink it. And again, I realize that it's not a slam dunk 2. It could go either way. They're at the bottom of my 2 line, but I just think I think the wins jump out at me more than the losses. But yeah, the losses, at least in terms of 2 seeds, do have me holding my nose a little bit. It's just as you go down, I haven't really seen anybody with those kinds of quality wins either.
Well, let me go back to you, John T. Who would be your 2 seeds here joining UCLA on this line?
The ACC is acknowledged, I think, by most people as the best conference in the country this year and getting the most teams in. Unless you want to put them all on like the 4 and 5 line, I think somebody's going to go at the 2 line. It's tough to. I don't know that there's one that stands out, which makes it tough. If I had to pick one, I could live with Florida State. They're 14-1. Their only loss is by 3 points at a neutral site to a Temple team that admittedly might and probably will miss the tourney. But when you're 3 points away from undefeated and you've got wins over Florida and at Virginia and Minnesota, who's good this year, I would go with the Seminoles.
I still think Butler is a special team. If a coach like Mick Cronin is sharing contempt for you, saying that they're too physical.
All right, Salika, you're on mute. We've already nixed Butler off the slide.
Nice going, John.
Butler will not be on the 2 line. There's a good case here for Florida State, but Tytel, who would your other 2 be? That we've heard Gonzaga and West Virginia mentioned as well.
I think it's kind of a similar thing with best left from a good conference. If you want to put another Big East team there, it's got to be Creighton or Xavier. If you want to put another ACC team, it's got to be Louisville or Virginia. Nobody stands out, so I'm happy to defer to the other gentleman.
All right. Do you want to make a case against Gonzaga being here on the 2 line?
No, I think they have to be there.
Okay. So we got Florida State, we got Gonzaga.
I have Gonzaga ahead of Florida State.
And that is how I meant to type it in, David. So thank you for correcting that. We got Gonzaga. We have Florida State. I mean, the name that I heard mentioned was West Virginia or potentially a Creighton or a Xavier. Stalika, I know you're a little biased on Xavier. So, David.
That doesn't mean I would have added them here, though.
My overall number 9 was Duke. And I realize that Duke has some holes, but I would still have them certainly ahead of Xavier or Creighton.
I'm going to pull up Duke's profile here because I think that is a very good that's a very interesting resume to look at this point with if we can get this to scroll down a bit. I mean, you only have 2 losses at Virginia Tech and to Kansas. I guess what you're missing here again, David, is the road wins, but it's just so early in the season still to
Yeah.
to say that.
And again, you're missing the road losses as well because Duke doesn't play on the road.
But what about West Virginia?
I really like them. I just don't think their paper is all the way up there yet. They do have the really nice win at Virginia. I think part of it, and it is a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I was really expecting them to beat Texas Tech. It's hard to win at Texas Tech, but if you're 2-3 seed, protected seed range, I think that's a game you should win. And it's a good profile. I could live with it, but outside of the Virginia win, they really haven't done much.
They beat Oklahoma State on the road pretty decisively, and they also beat Illinois pretty badly in the preseason NIT.
Is beating Illinois pretty badly really – I mean, isn't that sort of becoming a pastime?
I'm going to have Illinois on my list lower as we get towards the end of the show.
All right, we're muting you again,
No, you're not.
No, actually, I think that Illinois are really interesting. But let me go back to you, John T. I want to get off this two line, but here, Duke versus West Virginia. Do you think who has the better profile in your opinion right now?
Very tough call. If I had to pick one, I would go with West Virginia, but it's close.
And as a result, I am going to give West Virginia that last spot on the two line. We're going to start the three line off with that Duke team.
How does Chad get to be the arbiter? Why don't I ever get to do it?
Because then Nebraska would be in every one of the 68 spots, David.
And what's wrong with that?
Sleek, let me start with you here. We've put Duke in here on the three line already. Can you give me three more teams to join them?
Well, we still need to add Butler here since we haven't added them yet. But this is where I would also add Louisville and Creighton as other teams that would be 3-seed worthy right now.
Louisville and Creighton. Let me turn to you, Tytel. Do you agree with him that Butler, Louisville, and Creighton should join Duke on the three line at this point?
I'll go with Creighton, yes. I'll go with Louisville, yes. And who's the other one?
He's still arguing Butler.
It was a great win. Like, I can live with it. I kind of like Virginia just because they've beaten Louisville. I hate that they lost to Pitt. It was so close. I could live with Butler over Virginia, though.
Well, let me sit with you for 1 second. We have not seen a Big Ten team if we go this way. Should we have a Big Ten team in here by now?
If you wait 20 seconds, we might be able to put Purdue in as they're leading Ohio State at the moment. But I think that's a little too much of recency bias. I think that Wisconsin and Purdue and the like will be coming up in the 4 or 5 range. I think 3 is a little high just because none of them have an amazing blow-you-away resume, and they've all lost multiple games so far.
All right. Well,
I'm not as big on Creighton. I mean, they had the home win against Wisconsin, but it was a home win. And everyone else they've beaten is sort of NIT-ish at best, aren't they? They just don't pop out at me the way that – I know they're high in their rankings. I know they just have the one loss, and it was a pretty good game, but they just don't jump out at me the way the other teams that we've put in the field have so far.
I think you've got too much of a mental block of the McDermott regression, but that's still not due to happen for another month.
Well, I mean, am I right? I don't think it's that. I mean, I'm fully expecting that to happen. It's just that they've beaten Wisconsin at home, and then it's been NIT-ology.
Well, David, who would be on this three line that's not named Nebraska and beyond Duke here? Three more. The next three.
I don't know why I'm not being allowed to discuss Nebraska.
And you are allowed to discuss. I mean, Butler, I know you want here, so I guess I want the 2 more.
Louisville, who's been mentioned, Virginia, and I know they're kind of a home court hero, but it was 2 really big wins. I like Oregon all the way up here now.
Okay. Well, there has been kind of a consensus here about Louisville. I think that they have. They're going to fall in here.
Again on a neutral floor, the win. I like Louisville's profile.
All right. Well, with Louisville in there,
what are you? Oh,
I can't type in Louisville apparently. So
yeah.
Let's try again. Okay, there we go.
Good job, Gene.
With Louisville in, we've heard mentions here of Creighton, Virginia, Butler, and also brief mention of Oregon is David actually gave me an extra team there by giving me Oregon, so that would actually be the start of our.
Well, Louisville would be my number 12 overall.
Okay.
So, in case I had Butler in already.
Yeah, because you had Butler in already. So I think we've heard solid arguments also for both Virginia and Butler. So I think we're going to close out the 3 line with those 2 teams.
Butler begins with a B. Good judge. Chad,
okay.
I don't even have any arms, and I think I can type better than you.
Well, then, David, why don't you just take over the type? Why don't you just take over the typing right now, David? It's all you.
Oh, okay. There you go. Yes.
No, forget it. I'm taking it back. Let's go on to the 4 line actually. And John T, I'm going to turn back to you. We've heard mention. We've got 4 teams here. We've heard mention of both Creighton and Oregon already. Would they be on your 4 line? And if so, who else would be joining them?
I would put those 2 in for sure. As far as 2 others, I'm a little biased with Arizona, but I think they're more of a 5 just because they don't have any amazing wins on the resume so far. I know Xavier's dropped a couple games, but they've beaten a lot of people from good conferences, so I want to get Stalika in there for that. And then for the 4th one, I could live with – I still think we're not in the Big Ten yet, especially because Ohio State just tied up Purdue. So I'm thinking either Carolina or Florida.
The Carolina or Florida. Okay, so but you're definitely on the Xavier, Oregon, Creighton for 3 of them. Stalika, let me go to you here. What do you think of his teams, and where are you right now?
You know it's going to pain me to say this, but one of the teams I'm going to name is a team I probably would have walked out on a few podcasts ago. But besides Creighton, I would also add North Carolina, Wisconsin, and St. Mary's on my 4 line.
All right, there's our first mention, both of a Big Ten team in Wisconsin and in St. Mary's. So, David, let me turn to you. We've had several teams mentioned here. Oregon, which I believe you kind of agree on,
Yes.
and some mentions of Creighton, North Carolina, Xavier, Florida. Where are you?
I agree on Creighton. I agree on North Carolina. I don't really have Xavier near this line yet because of, I guess, of their road struggles. And again, they don't have that win that really pops yet. I think they'll play their way up here. I just don't think they're here yet. I'm going to throw out another one at you. Like Notre Dame.
Okay, Notre Dame, another new name. Well, I think the teams that we've heard multiple mentions of here are Creighton, Oregon, and North Carolina. If I could type things in the right order, it would help. But beyond that, we're all over the place from what I'm hearing now for this last spot on the 4 line, which would be a protected seed between Wisconsin, Florida, St. Mary's, Xavier, Notre Dame. There's only 3 of you, and I think we've got 6 teams there. I don't know how we pulled this off. So let me go through each of you here. Of those teams, again, Wisconsin, Florida, St. Mary's, Xavier, Notre Dame, make your case for who is the best profile. Let me start with you, Stalika.
Well, since David G. Puppet insists on going for road wins, I have to nominate Wisconsin here because they're fresh off a win at Indiana. And if you look at some other teams that they've also beaten away from home, Tennessee and Georgetown on a neutral floor, Marquette on the road, and then there's Syracuse and Oklahoma, but those wins are starting to also drift a little bit by the wayside. But 4-2 overall away from home is still pretty decent.
Right, and I just pulled up this Wisconsin profile. No top 50 wins, and I guess that's the biggest problem here is where's that big time win?
Well, you can thank Indiana for that.
David, do you want to make a case for one of those teams that we're discussing here?
The thing I like about Notre Dame is they don't have any great wins. They just had the win against Louisville, albeit it was a home win. I know it was a loss, but I don't think you can ding them at all for Villanova on a neutral floor. If anything, I think I was more impressed with them after that game. But I like the neutral floor win against Northwestern. I like the one against Colorado a little bit. And overall, I just kind of think they've done more. It's not that I'm big on Notre Dame. It's just when I start comparing them to some of the other teams that have been mentioned, Xavier, like where's their big win? I like them a little more. I just kind of like this Notre Dame profile and team.
Well, John T., let me go to you here. As I've got Notre Dame's profile up there. You see there are 3 top 50 wins, including the win at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, at Pitt. I forgot to mention that one.
I think that I'm going to stick with Florida. They've lost 3 games all season. Duke, Gonzaga, and Florida State by 5, 10, and 5, all of them away from home. I know they don't have a signature win, but I think that the number of top 100 teams, Arkansas, Mississippi, Miami, Seton Hall, even Florida Gulf Coast is a good win. Like, Notre Dame is a good team, and is Wisconsin, but I kind of like Florida just because the only losses they have are to, like, top seeds.
And I like that. I've got that Florida profile now up as well. These are coming from ESPN.com, which sorts them by RPI rank for your wins. And we can see there the Seton Hall neutral court win and the win at Arkansas. And I'll kind of just flip right back here over to David's team. I got to say that with, only 2 losses, and one of them being to Villanova, who is our number 1 team, I'm going to kind of end up – it's a good enough call here. We've got 3 different choices. I'm going to end up siding with David here. I'm going to go with I hate siding with him. I am going to go with Notre Dame.
Wait, no. I had Nebraska there.
I'm still going with Notre Dame. I think that Florida and Wisconsin would be the next 2 teams. And, in fact, I think that a nice, easy way to do this would be just give them those next 2 spots right here on the 5 line. And that'll help us keep things moving along as well. So from now to finish up the 5 line, we'd only actually need 2 more teams. And David, I'm going to start with you this time. We've heard some mention of both St. Mary's and Xavier, but who would your next 2 teams be?
Indiana, who we haven't busted out here, and I know that they've been tanking lately, but the ELO chess concept, the concept of, overall, well, never mind.
ELO chess. Go ahead. I want an explanation of what ELO chess is, David, please.
And I'm assuming we're not talking about the band here.
And this is oversimplifying it. So for all you stat geeks, I'm sorry. Essentially, it measures it rates how well you do against, or how well you do against how good the teams are. So if you're 5th and you lose to the 3rd team, you don't really move down. And if you're 5th and you beat the 8th team, you don't really move up.
Now, is this in basketball or in chess?
It's meant for rating chess players, but it's a concept that you don't really move down or up. Now, Indiana will have moved down because of their last 2 losses, but it doesn't erase what they did early in the season against Kansas and North Carolina. So I think the 5 line or the 5 line is a good place for them. I have Florida on this line, who's already been mentioned, Arizona, and St. Mary's, who had also been mentioned.
Okay, so Arizona and St. Mary's along. Well, I guess you're giving me 3 teams here, but you're giving me Arizona, you're giving me St. Mary's, and you're giving me Indiana. I just want to pull up Indiana's profile. Tytel, I'm going to go to you next to take a look at this. But, Indiana, great job beating sub-250 teams. I really got to applaud them.
And look at that.
It is.
Galen Clavio when you need him.
Yeah.
So who are the teams we have on the line right now?
Okay, let me pull that screen back up for you here. We've already put in both Florida and Wisconsin. The teams that David mentioned as potentials here are Arizona, St. Mary's, and Indiana. And I know you had previously mentioned Xavier as well as a potential team here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep it with the Johns. I think we're going to get Arizona and Xavier in here. Arizona's only 2 losses to a Butler team that we have on the 3 line and a Gonzaga team on the 2 line. And with the Florida philosophy, if your only losses are to amazing teams, get them in. I like Florida and Wisconsin here. As far as the other one, I want to get Xavier in there. They've beaten a lot of teams. The Baylor loss is probably a good loss. The Colorado loss, less so. They've played some good mid-major teams and beaten them all. So I want the 2 Johns to get some representation here.
Okay.
What's wrong with me getting representation?
Well, Stalika,
I kind of enjoy. I kind of liked it the other way.
Stalika, let me go to you.
Okay, in all seriousness, I would have Xavier around my 5 line because I would actually have them number 19 overall. But I also want to highlight St. Mary's profile because this is one of the reasons why I had them in protected seed territory earlier. Of their 12 wins, 4 of them are going to include Nevada, Dayton on the road, Stanford on the road, which is not the easiest place to win, and also a conference leader in UC Irvine. Their only loss so far this year is going to be against Texas Arlington, who may well be an NCAA tournament team themselves. But as far as Xavier, I think the win against Clemson is going to kind of ebb and flow as to whether or not that's going to be their best win. But also keep in mind they're going to be coming up on a gauntlet of teams in the Big East, including Villanova, Butler, and Creighton. So we'll see just whether or not they're going to be for real or for fraud in the next 2 weeks. But do not overlook the Johnnies at home this weekend.
I just pulled St. Mary's profile up here because they're the team that the debate seems to be here between Xavier, Arizona, and St. Mary's as the three potential teams. And John T., let me go back to you because you did not have St. Mary's at this point. Do you want to make an argument why St. Mary's belongs lower down and how far down they do belong?
I would love to. Not too much farther down. I have them as a 6, and because of that, I can live with them as a 5. Look at, much like the Indiana thing, all those wins against terrible, terrible teams. Stanford is 8-6. Like, I know they're Pac-12, but they just got swept by ASU and Arizona. Nevada's having an off year. Dayton, good win, but it's by 4. There's just not enough meat there. I mean, they get BYU in a couple hours. Like, call me in a couple hours. But I think that I think Arizona and Xavier are ahead of St. Mary's.
And quite frankly, I do agree with you. And Arizona and Xavier will complete this line. We will go ahead and put St. Mary's right there at the top of the 6th line. So they didn't miss it by much. But
I had Xavier 21 overall, so I can live with them at 20. You're not like exactly right, but you're pretty close, Chad.
All right. David, I'm still not putting Nebraska in yet.
Well, why not?
Let me actually go back to Sleeger. Let me go to you for this time around as we go to the 6th line. We already do have St. Mary's in. And the only team we've actually had mentioned that has not gone in yet at all has been Indiana. So why don't you give me 3 more teams to go with St. Mary's and let me know if Indiana is one of them.
Well, I would have Indiana number 22 overall, so they will be one of the teams that I'll be bringing in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be bringing in Cincinnati as the leader of the American right now, and this is where I would also add Virginia Tech, who had a mixed bag to open the ACC, had a very nice win at home against Duke, and then managed to wet the bed at NC State a couple nights ago.
Oh, they did more than just wet it. Oh, man. They sharded that bit.
And somebody just updated me here. Did Purdue win this game against Ohio State?
They did.
Yes, put them in.
Okay, and so that's what my question is going to be. Is why Purdue is not in at this point yet from your bracket, Sleeka. But let me go, John T., let me go to you here. Would Purdue be in your grouping here?
Yes, I also like Cincinnati, despite the fact that they're leading a terrible American conference. Of course, St. Mary's. And if we've already got Notre Dame in, I kind of want to I could live with Virginia Tech. It was a great win over Duke. If we have to go with an ACC team, I like Clemson too. I could go either way with those two.
But you're still not on the Indiana bandwagon yet.
No, that train is derailed, so it's going to slide a couple.
Okay. Well, the Va-Tech win, it is over Duke. However, it's Duke without Grayson Allen. Does that factor into your decision?
No. That's his own damn fault that he missed the game.
It was his own damn fault, but you know, how much credit do you think Va-Tech still wins that game if Grayson Allen plays?
Absolutely, they do.
Okay. All right, well, David, let me turn to you here. See who your teams are to join St.
Well,
Mary.
I have Virginia Tech as well. I have Purdue as well. Xavier, we already put on the other line. I have Michigan State and Cincinnati, since I already had St. Mary's and Xavier in.
Okay. Well, there has been consensus about 3 of these teams pretty much here. Well, actually, I'm sorry, there was not consensus with Purdue, but there was consensus with both Virginia Tech coming in here and Cincinnati, which I don't know how to spell apparently. Let's try Virginia Tech again. And Cincinnati, which I do know how to spell. And Purdue is going to fill out this line here. The team that's mentioned the most still that we haven't put in yet is Indiana. I think that there's a –
Oh, wait. I would definitely have had Indiana in by this point.
And I know, Titel, you want to keep them dropping, but I can't drop them anymore. These two are fighting too heavily for the Hoosiers. So I think we got to put Indiana in here.
You know how many games they've won since Christmas, anyone?
Well, how many games have they played since Christmas?
3. They're 0-3. 2 at home.
And
Put 'em-
putting Indiana in
put 'em
as
out
a seven seed, I know this would be a historically low RPI for a 7 seed at 139.
What?
It would be a historically low seed for low bad RPI for a
Another
14
column.
seed, in fact. But
Yes. This is what happens when Tom Crane schedules. Oh,
Even when you beat teams like Kansas and North Carolina, that is an incredibly shitty RPI for it.
that is a testament. That takes effort.
well, where are we here? We're on the 7 line, right? John T. Let me turn to here. Even though you and I are both protesting Indiana being here, I know you've mentioned Clemson as a team you like already that we have not put in. Are there 2 others you want to throw in there to join them?
I think we got to get another Big Ten team in there. I could live with Minnesota or Maryland. I think they're neck and neck. And then if you want to put them both in, that's fine. If not, I think that despite the shellacking in Eugene, that USC has just enough meat and just enough of a great record to squeeze in, but it was a pretty bad loss.
Well, Maryland, I mean, you want to defend that Maryland pick this high? I mean, I would argue Michigan State at this point, just based on what they've done the last week or so and how well they're starting to play now.
I mean,
Maryland.
I can live with Michigan State too, and especially now that they have Bridges back, they can excuse away some of the losses due to that. Maryland, they have had a very shaky schedule. They've been squeaking by everybody, and everybody's been average. Georgetown by 1, Kansas State by 1, Oklahoma State by 1. They beat Illinois, but as we know, who hasn't? And then the losses, a tough double-digit loss at home to a good Pitt team, and then the loss at home to Nebraska by 2 is going to really, I think, sting them. But Michigan State's having a great run and is getting one of their best players back. But 2 losses, and one of them just by a whisker is pretty good to me.
All right. Well, David, let me turn to you here. Why don't you put that bracket back up and give me 3 teams to join your pathetically bad RPI team of Indiana.
Okay, we're 7 line here. I have Michigan State, who you sort of mentioned. I can live with. I like Minnesota. I'm surprised that I like them so much because at first I thought their record was a reflection of going to the bakery and not them, but they have some meat on their profile. And the other team I have up here is Clemson. I know they just lost at home to North Carolina, but I have them at number 28 overall.
Okay. Well, Salika, let me get your thoughts on 3 teams. The 3 that I've mentioned the most actually have been Minnesota, Michigan State, and Clemson. Also mentions of both Maryland and USC.
I'm also going with 2 football powers here in Clemson and USC, and because of their win against Purdue, I am going to add Minnesota to the list of teams I would consider on the 7 line as well. I mean, it looks like a bakery cart, but when you look at some of the wins that Minnesota has had, Texas Arlington, Arkansas State, Arkansas, and also Vanderbilt on a neutral floor, that's not too bad, but my main concern for them is only 3 games away from the barn, but they are 2-1 away from home.
Well, and if you look at RPI numbers as we stand right now, Minnesota, very respectable. Minnesota, very respectable. Indiana.
I mean,
we have the consensus that Clemson and Minnesota both being here, and I agree with that also. I have not liked Minnesota all year, but now there's suddenly I would have them right here on the 7 line as well. I do agree with that. Sorry, David, you had a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, if Indiana can lower their RPI by 130, they'd be in much better shape.
The other 2 teams that we've had mentioned here are both USC and Michigan State, and I think at the end of the day, Michigan State's going to be a way better team, but USC just has the 1 loss so far, and I think we've got to put them in up here. So, so let's put USC in first, and Michigan State can start out our 8 line.
Yes, you're going to make a 1 seed very happy with that, Jen. You are welcome.
David, the only team we've actually had mentioned that we do not now have in as we go move to the Atlantic has been Maryland, but we want to have 3 more teams to join Michigan State here. So who would your next 3 be? And there's one team that I think we've kind of overlooked so far, but I'll see if you mention them before I comment on it.
Let's see. Okie State, Pittsburgh. We don't have Pittsburgh in yet, do we?
No.
And Seton Hall is number 32 overall for me.
Okay, hold on. You went Seton Hall. You went
Oklahoma
Pittsburgh,
State and Pitt. Yeah.
and you went Oklahoma State. Well, you went to the right conference for me, but I don't think you went to the right team. But let me turn to Titel. Who would your 3 teams here be, along with Michigan State?
Texas is 7-7. One of their 7 wins is against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is not getting an 8th seed.
They won at Wichita. Won at Wichita.
Wichita's not in the field yet, David.
They will be soon. As far as some other teams, I think we're kind of sleeping on Iowa State.
That's my team. I thought we were missing. Exactly.
What do I have?
Losses to a couple of our 1 and 2 seeds, Gonzaga and Baylor. The loss to Iowa is going to hurt them. No amazing wins. Miami and Texas Tech are solid. So I would like the Cyclones. They were so close to beating Baylor, too. It's such a disappointment.
Oh, man. Yeah, had they won that, I would have had them up here. I have them in the field, but a few lines lower.
All right. So you mentioned Iowa State. You also mentioned Maryland previously, John T. Is there one other team you want to mention at this point?
As much as I want to be the first person to ever get Northwestern into the field, they've been kind of struggling, and Pitt had a great win over Virginia, so I want to get Pitt up there.
So you're looking Pitt too. All right. Salika, let me go to you here.
I mean, if you're looking for Northwestern, skip ahead a couple. No. But as far as the 8 line, I would go Maryland, Seton Hall, and Pittsburgh is the other 3 teams I would add at this point.
Maryland, Seton Hall, and Pittsburgh. Well, we have 2 votes for each of them. So at this point, Iowa State, David, unless you want to change your pick, don't hear not hearing it.
I don't. I have Iowa State all the way down at number 45.
We've had Pittsburgh, Seton Hall, and Maryland all mentioned here. So those are that's going to complete our 8 line. And let me, as we move to the 9 line, Stalika, let me start with you
like Maryland
on the 9 line. Iowa State has not yet gotten in. They've been mentioned.
Chad has made his decision, so we'll just live with it. Even
Maryland.
Yes.
I'm not going to mention Iowa yet either, but what I'm going to do is this is where I would add Northwestern to the mix. I would also add Arkansas to the mix. This is where I would add Oklahoma State, and I think after a little bit of deliberation, I'm going to choose Colorado over Dayton.
Okay.
All the way up here.
Before we go any further, Stalika, you just let me down by not mentioning South Carolina here. I mean,
well, I know they have a bunch of losses, but again,
but Thornwell was out and he comes back and they look great and win at Georgia.
He was suspended. He was not injured for something.
It doesn't. Even if he's suspended, the team that was on the floor against Georgia last night, I thought looked like a tournament team, and I'm not one to defend Angry Frank very often.
They did look like a tournament team, but at the same time, I think Georgia is more of an NIT caliber team. They may be NCAA tournament caliber later in the year, but they are not there yet.
Well, David, let me go to you here.
Frank wants to key my Miata. That is his prerogative.
David, let me turn to you here on these 4 teams here for the 9 line, and we are getting very close to the bubble. You see, we have 12 at-large bids remaining, so it's going to start getting very contentious at this point. I know, but I thought that if you're an NCAA tournament team, you should beat NIT teams on the road.
Yes.
That's what South Carolina did last night, wasn't it?
Yeah. I don't have them all the way up here. I have them – well, I actually do. Since Maryland is already in the field, my 9 line is Wichita, Northwestern, Nebraska, and in all seriousness, Nebraska and South Carolina. That's who I have, like, all the way up here.
All right. John T., we've heard mention now of Northwestern, Nebraska, Oklahoma State for some reason I don't understand, Colorado for some reason I don't understand, Wichita, Arkansas, South Carolina. Do you want to give us the 4 teams that we should
Oklahoma State won at Wichita.
And Wichita's still on the field, David. Okay.
Well, they're about to be on the
John T.
So I think that I want to get Iowa State in. I agree with the Northwestern pick. At first, I was a little concerned, but with their 3 losses at Butler, neutral site Notre Dame, at Michigan State, all by single digits. Those are 3 quality losses, even if there's not a lot of quality wins. So if we can pick some non-Big Ten teams, I like Arkansas. I like Arkansas.
Can we get Arkansas's profile up? Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to slide down a couple spots here. I'm going to pull Arkansas's profile up so we can take a look at this.
They've lost to Minnesota, who we have as a 7 seed, and Florida, who we have as a 5 seed.
And they've beaten Texas Arlington.
And that's a shame that they didn't schedule better. And if their penalty is they have to go down or miss the tourney, I get it. But
They also beat Fort Wayne, who
They beat Fort Wayne. They beat Texas on a neutral court. Which you can't penalize them for scheduling there. Houston, who is having a pretty good year, they won at Tennessee. It's not awful. It's not great, but it's 9 seed-ish, isn't it?
Maybe it's just I've caught them on the wrong nights. I don't think their paper is that strong, at least not on the surface. I guess if you really, really had to make a case for them in debate class, you could. But on the court, I just don't think they look that good. I mean, I watched the Arlington game, and to be fair, I like Arlington, and I know it was early in the year. They didn't look good there. They didn't really look good at Tennessee. I thought they should have – I guess Tennessee, to be fair, is a little better than I thought, but I thought they should have rolled over them. Fort Wayne hung in there. Texas, who isn't good, another game that I watched, they had to sweat them out. I just don't really see it out of this. I mean, it's a eye test thing, which I hate to use because I know that, but they don't look good, and their paper doesn't jump out at me either. I have them in, but I have them around the first 4. I mean, I'm just not
still win at Tennessee, though, which is not something Arkansas has been able to do in recent years, not just winning at Tennessee, but winning in other hostile SEC venues. So that's a nice bounce back after losing at home to Florida.
Yeah, I think the win at Tennessee is their best win because it was a true road game, but is that enough for a 9?
Well, let's put this Arkansas on the back burner for half a second here. And I want to go back to John T. You only gave me 2 teams. You gave me Iowa State. Actually, you gave me 3, Iowa State, Northwestern, and Arkansas. Is there a 4th team? And then I'm going to want your comments on the team I have on the screen after that.
We're getting into the not the cream, but the chaff. And so if we have to pick somebody, I'm going to throw out SMU. They have not lost since November. Granted, they've beaten a bunch of bad teams, but TCU and Memphis and Temple are decent. I can't explain the Michigan loss that I was at in person. They just had a bad night. Lost by 5 at a good USC team who's on our board, and it's tough to explain the loss by 9 at Boise after Thanksgiving. We're getting down to it, so we just have to start throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
All right. Well, I also have up here on the screen Oklahoma State's profile, which both David and Stalika like so far.
And look at that win at Wichita State.
Based on a win over a Wichita State team that is not in our field and a Georgetown team that is not in our field, and powerful wins over the likes of Central Arkansas, Campbell, and Arkansas Pine Bluff. Titel, does Oklahoma State even belong in the field at this point?
I do. I have them a little lower, but
Okay.
I mean, if everybody likes them, throw them in here.
All right. I mean, I've got to go by the
Chad
consensus.
doesn't like them, so they're not going.
2 of you like
The
them.
way this works is that we just do what Chad wants.
It's not their fault that UConn has imploded this year.
All right. Oklahoma
Or is
State is going to go in there. The other 2 teams that we had that we previously discussed were both Arkansas and Iowa State, and well on this line. That would fill out the 9 line here. Only 8 spots left. We may debate a few more teams than that because there's a few auto bids that may come in here as well.
Yep.
But as we move to, what are we up to, the 10 line? John T., let me have you start here with the 10 line as well. And give me, I know you've mentioned SMU already. Is there 3 other teams to go along with SMU that you think should be in this area?
One of the teams SMU beat was TCU, which they only have 2 losses to SMU and to a great Kansas team by 6. Not a lot of great wins, but only 2 losses, and they're going to have a tough one at West Virginia on Saturday. I expect them to get destroyed, but as of right now, I like them.
Okay, so SMU, TCU, why don't you give me 2 more below that even?
Let's get Frank in there, and since somebody loves Wichita State, let's throw them a bone as well.
Okay, Wichita State, South Carolina. David, I know you agree with him, both Wichita State and South Carolina at this point.
Yep.
You've mentioned Nebraska as well, so I guess I would just need one more team from you.
The team would be who isn't in?
He's mentioned both TCU and SMU.
Is Nebraska in?
Nebraska is not in yet, but you have mentioned them. Yeah.
Okay, I mentioned them. I think the next team that hasn't been mentioned is kind of going under the radar here. I have Middle Tennessee up here. I actually have Middle Tennessee on. Well, yeah, this is the 10 line. That would be my next team that we haven't mentioned.
All right, and let's do that. Let's take a quick under the radar peek here at Middle Tennessee. This is a team that a lot of people may not be as familiar with, being out in Conference USA, which is a pretty irrelevant conference.
Yes.
But the city of the RPI of 36, they have, if I get the profile up here correctly, they won. They've been UNC Wilmington, one at Ole Miss, one at Belmont, one beat Toledo twice, home losses to Tennessee State and Georgia State. David, is this really an at-large profile here, comparable to teams like the South Carolinas and the TCUs that we're discussing?
I think that it is compared to those, because I mean they've won at Ole Miss, they blew out Vanderbilt, they won at Belmont. It's not easy to win there. I think TCU has a bloated record that they ran up basically winning home bye games. Middle Tennessee played better teams. I think the teams they've played are better. I think that's why the RPI is so inflated. And although they haven't won as many road games as Wilmington, who's another team, believe it or not, that I have inside the bubble, I think it does compare to those two. I think it's better I know that I think Middle Tennessee would beat both of those teams.
Right, well, and then here is that TCU profile that you just pointed out. And again, when we look at it, it kind of backs up what you just said. A bunch of home wins over even their top 100 wins are Arkansas State and Texas Southern.
Yeah.
Sleeka, let me turn to you. We've definitely heard some love for South Carolina and Wichita State in this line, but why don't you give me a couple other teams, or give me your 4 teams for this line?
I won't have any arguments about those 2 teams, so I'm just going to add 2 more to the mix here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to add Colorado here because they've been up and down, and there's another team that we briefly mentioned earlier that we have not mentioned yet as far as this line, and this is where I do go with the Illinois Fighting Illini. They have some pretty nice wins over NC State and Virginia Commonwealth on a neutral floor. They've also beaten BYU away from home and also got a nice win against Ohio State in the Spaceship on Sunday.
Well, first of all, your Colorado team you mentioned here. John T., let me turn to you. This Colorado team with 3 sub-100 losses, do they even belong in the field right now, or
No.
Did John just watch the Xavier game and that's it?
Oh, I think last week they might have, but when you go to Utah and lose by 16 points, even though I like Utah and think they're getting better, it's hard to explain away a 14-point loss to Colorado State at home. I just don't see it right now. But obviously, they have Arizona, UCLA, and USC as 3 of the next 4, so plenty of opportunities in the future.
And David, I'm going to ask you the same question about Illinois, whether this is a current NCAA tournament profile as it comes up on my screen here. We do have the NC State and the VCU wins. Do you think that the Fighting Illini belong in our field here, especially with that home loss to Winthrop?
I have them squarely on the bubble. I didn't even count to see if they would have made it in, but I have them in the 12-13 range.
Okay.
Because again, who have they beaten that really rises above that?
Well, let me go ahead. First of all, put the 2 consensus teams in here. Everybody agreed that Wichita State belongs in the field right here. That's actually not going to decrease anything off of our at-large bid count. We also have agreement that South Carolina belongs in at this point. We kind of had mentioned here for these other 2 spots on the 10 line, though, SMU, Nebraska, Middle Tennessee, Illinois, Colorado, TCU. Let me run through each of you and tell me who your best 2 out of that are, and make your case for your best one of those, actually, really. And John T., let me start with you here.
I'll go with SMU and TCU because everything is bigger in Texas.
Everything's bigger in Texas. David, can you argue with everything's bigger in Texas?
I still like Middle Tennessee for the reasons that I just said earlier.
And how about Nebraska? Is that
Yeah, Middle Tennessee and Nebraska.
I hate to do this. I really hate to do this. But, David, I want to give you a second here to make the Nebraska argument.
Well, I mean, you got to look. It starts off with who their coach is.
Okay.
I mean, just phenomenal. So there's that element. I know that their record is kind of ugly. I mean, when you look at it, 8-6, that's just not good. But really, when you look at their losses, we're looking UCLA, protected seed, 1 seed, actually, Virginia Tech, borderline protected seed, at Clemson, already in the field wearing white, Creighton, way up on the seed list, Kansas. There's only one where you're really holding your nose. And it is a bad loss, but I think when you go to Maryland and win, and you go to Indiana and win, that's really good. I mean, those are 2 road wins against teams that typically don't lose at home. I know Indiana just lost another home game, but I just think that this is about where they belong.
And don't forget, they've also beaten Dayton and the Wooden Legacy in Anaheim. So those 3 wins can absolve quite a few sins, even including the Gardner-Webb stinker at home, and even an ugly win against Southern, which could have just as easily been a loss for Nebraska, but was not. I mean, if we're going to give Michigan State credit for their killer schedule earlier, we have to give Nebraska a look.
I went ahead and I'm going to give David his Nebraska team right there on the 10 line they're in. SMU's the other team. Salika, sorry. You're swaying me on Illinois. You did not sway me on Colorado. But let me pull up a profile here that nobody has mentioned yet. And
with good reason.
None of you feel that Michigan is a NCAA tournament team, especially after what they did early in the season, winning the event, John T, that you were at. Do you think that this is, having won 4 out of 5 now, that they have recovered, or no?
They have, but that Iowa law, I mean, it was on the road in the Big Ten on New Year's Day and in overtime by 3 points. Like, I don't know that is enough to put them above or below. Nobody's beaten UCLA this year outside of one team. The loss at South Carolina was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the Virginia Tech home loss hurts, but it was only by 3. Like, they're squarely on the bubble, and if you want to push them off the bubble because the Iowa lost, that's fine.
Okay, I'm going to just shut down some of these windows here so we get a little more room on the screen in a second. But let me go ahead and run one other team over there, not Michigan. I'm just kind of throwing some teams out that nobody's mentioned. What about VCU here? David, nobody's mentioned them yet. Do they deserve some consideration around this point?
I mean, maybe consideration, but there's teams I like a lot more than them. In fact, there's one. I mean, there's one team that I hope you mention them. Most you will, that I like a lot more than them.
Okay.
But again, they have the home win over Middle Tennessee,
who you just told us how much you loved.
Who I like, but still isn't in the field, and it was at home. And next, it's like, what is it? Asheville at home, LSU at home. At Old Dominion's probably their next big win.
David, they do have 6 wins away from home. They only have 1 bad loss and to Georgia Tech, a Georgia Tech team that beat North Carolina, right?
Well, okay. Let's yeah. I actually do think they're not going to get a lot of credit for this, but I think the win at George Mason is a really good win by comparison when you're looking at the teams at this level. But there's just someone I like more than them.
Okay. Well, let me go here. Let me go back up to the board here and take VCU off there. We have not obviously put them in yet. And Sleek, I'm going to start with you here. I know you like Illinois and Colorado, but why don't you give me 2 other teams? We've heard some mention about Middle Tennessee and TCU, but why don't you give me 2 other teams to go with Illinois and Colorado for you on this line?
Outside of those 2 teams that you mentioned, this is where I would add the Dayton Flyers and also the Miami Hurricanes. I mean, if we're looking at Dayton's profile, where I feel slightly more better about what they've done, no wins against any teams that are solid NCAA at the field, but you look at wins again at Alabama on the road, St. Bonaventure on the road, and they've also beaten East Tennessee State and Vanderbilt at home.
Right. Well, here is Dayton's profile, and again, you don't have the great wins, but you've got some road wins, and all your losses are top 50, although between 40 to 49. John T., let me go to you here. Who would be your teams other than TCU as we look at this 10 line or 11 line? Sorry.
Keep that Dayton profile up for a second because I think you're glossing over the fact that they were like they lost to 3 teams in the 40 to 50 range. 4 points, 2 points, 3 points, and only one of them was at home. Like, this is a good team.
Okay.
So thank you for that. As far as some other teams, I want to put Miami up there, but I'm not loving their resume, especially after losing by 15 at the Qs. Of all years to lose to Syracuse by double digits, and they played a bunch of bad teams this year. As far as other teams, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Like, I like VCU. I like Illinois. I mean, but they're not great. So throw in anybody you want.
Okay. Well, David, we've got to somehow get 5 more at-large bids out of this. So why don't you throw a few teams at me as well? I know Middle Tennessee would still be on your list here, but why don't you give me 3 more?
Another one staying under the radar. I really like this UNC Wilmington team. 6 true road wins and 8 overall away from home. 12-2 overall. One of the losses was at losing my mind. They did have the bad loss. Kind of one of their losses was at Clemson, and they didn't play well in that game. And the other loss was a neutral floor game against Middle Tennessee, who I also have up here. They don't have a win that really pops out at you other than maybe the win at St. Bonaventure. Not that St. Bonaventure is a strong team, but they typically do play well at home. I think had they beaten Clemson, they would already be in the field. We'd probably have them on the 9 or the 10 line. But I still think overall this is a pretty good team.
And we look at this 8 wins away from home. That's very impressive as well, even though 5 of them were against sub 150 teams. Stalika, I don't think I've gone to you yet on this line, have I?
You did,
I did
because
go to
this
you.
is where
Okay,
I mentioned Dayton and Miami.
Then you are right. Then we need to start making some decisions here. And there has been discussion about Dayton here that I think is enough to warrant them being in. And there's been enough discussion about Illinois at this point that I think that at least 2 of you like them. We're going to put them in here. We still have 2 more spots, and the teams that have been mentioned include Miami, Colorado, Middle Tennessee, Wilmington, VCU, TCU, and no mention from any of you about North Carolina State.
And for good reason.
Yes. I do have. I'm not big on TCU. I mean, I like what they're doing as far as turning their program around, but I'm just not big on them as a tournament team.
Right. NC State, despite the 104-78 win over Virginia Tech, John T., isn't this NC State profile a borderline bubble type of profile?
I'll give you that. I mean, losses to Creighton where they gave up 112 points, and to Illinois, who we have in the field, and Miami, who we may have in the field, like 3 solid losses, none of them at home. Virginia Tech win was amazing, and if they keep trending that way, they're looking good. They're going to have a tough game at Carolina on Saturday, and a couple of relatively easy games with BC and Georgia Tech before they get into the heart of ACC play. I think squarely just outside the bubble, but certainly trending up.
Well, based on what we'll hear for the weather, they may not be playing any game on Saturday in North Carolina, but we'll find out about that. At some point, they won't be playing at North Carolina this season, though. David, do you think I'm crazy about talking about NC State?
Maybe not by talking about them, but I don't have them inside the bubble. Teams I like better than them include Texas Tech, Marquette. We already have Illinois in. I Michigan, who we talked about earlier, but still haven't put in. These are all teams I would have ahead of NC State and TCU.
Well, I think you just mentioned 2 other teams that I think we do need to have a quick discussion of. First of all, Texas Tech has not been mentioned yet. Stalika, is there a case for Texas Tech to be in this field?
Well, they began to make a case for themselves after they knocked off West Virginia at home earlier this week. And also keep an eye on their win at home against Nicholls State, which we get under the radar later tonight. We may actually be including them as the Southland representative.
Yes, they did beat a team that if they win their conference tournament, will be going to Dayton. Congratulations. David.
After that case, I think we need to take Texas Tech off.
I'll tell you that we've got to make some decisions here, though. I am going to agree with
No,
Tytel
wrong,
about
wrong.
TCU.
I can live with TCU.
Wrong.
And
You put Middle Tennessee there.
I've got to eliminate these three teams here that we're just checking the profiles. And David, I'm going to agree with you on UNC Wilmington.
Okay.
I really like this UNC Wilmington team. I think an 11 seed is a fair number for them. It doesn't actually help us fill out this field, though, because that we still have 3 spots left. And that's what I think we want to do here is we want to figure out who these last 3 at-large bids are going to. The teams we've
What
had
about
mentioned,
Where would you have Middle Tennessee?
I would have them probably right on the 12 line here, along with the last 3 at-large bids. So, in fact, I think it's fair to even do this for you, David.
Okay.
There you go. Middle Tennessee, although I actually like Wilmington's profile better. But we do have a Texas Tech that's been mentioned. We've had NC State. We've had Colorado, Miami, VCU, Michigan, even a slight mention of Marquette. Let me go through each of you and just tell me who you think these last 3 at-large teams should be. Salika, let me start with you.
I guess if we're not considering Colorado very seriously. So at this point, I'm just going to go with Miami, Michigan, and VCU as my last 3 teams in the field.
Okay, John T.
Wow, that's 3 pretty good teams. My only caveat, I think I'm going to agree with all 3 of those, actually. I don't think it's going to be a mid-major team like a Texas Arlington or a Valpo. And Texas Tech, talk about one win, like changing your entire season. Like they went from not even in consideration to like right there. Only caveat for the 8-10, I think we have to get another 8-10 team in there, and it's probably VCU as of today. Do not sleep on Rhode Island. Like they've had a rough little season, but they've had a lot of close losses, and they had a 10-point loss at a neutral site to Duke. I'll go with John's 3 for now, but I think this could easily become Rhode Island over VCU in the weeks ahead.
David, you may be outvoted already, but they both like Miami, Michigan, and VCU here.
Well, I like 2 of those. I like Michigan and VCU. The other team I like is Marquette. I mentioned Texas Tech, but only to say I liked them more than NC State. That wasn't meant as praise for Texas Tech as it was to emphasize how little I thought of NC State. And I still like them more than NC State.
I typed in Marquette there, not to actually choose Marquette, but because by typing them in, I could pull up their profile.
Yeah.
And I just want to
it's
pull them up.
blah. It's kind of bland, but there's nothing. You're not really holding your nose at anything here. And they do have a nice win at Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe I am. I think they're the only team that's won there.
But they also had
South
an
Carolina
opportunity to add Seton Hall to their win total, but they couldn't finish that one off.
Yeah, South Carolina won at
right,
Georgia last night, David.
Yeah.
Okay. In the end, obviously, we're going to go not with David. We're going to go against
What?
Miami. Gets our last spot.
What have the Redhawks done to warrant inclusion?
Some of the top teams out do include Marquette, Texas Tech, Rhode Island's been mentioned here.
NC State.
NC State's been mentioned. And John, I'll put Colorado on here as well because you mentioned them. And no mention of Ohio State losing tonight. No real mention of Georgia. No mention of Houston, though. No love for the Cougars either.
I had them on my list, but not in the field. I guess you would consider Houston, others considered. I just think that I again, and I sound like a broken record, I think their program is trending in the right direction. I think they have a chance at a bid, but they haven't done enough heavy lifting yet, so they need to do that in conference. And to do that in conference, they basically need to blow through most of it.
I mean, if we're also going to be talking about other teams that would be among the first 4 out, I can't believe I'm saying this because this is going to be coming full circle. How about the Memphis Tigers, the way they've been starting this year?
Yeah, that's another one. I mean, there's a couple of names that could be thrown out there, including Central Florida, maybe a team like a Cal, or even a Wake Forest, which I hate to mention as well. But they're sitting there with some pretty nice ratings right now. But let me run through each of you now that we have it ended up being a 1 through 48 seed list here, and ask you, what do you think is the worst thing that we ended up doing from this consensus? What's the biggest crime we've made? David, what's the biggest crime you see on this list here?
I think it's TCU because I think we're rewarding a team that is doing. I think their program is doing well. I think we're a little bit hypnotized because they're so much better than what we're used to seeing. But at the end of the day, the bulk of their profile is nothing but home bye wins. Rutgers has done the same thing pretty much. And I'm not as big on Miami. I just don't think they've done anything that pops out at you to be included. I know that they're the last team in, but I wouldn't have quite had them in.
John T., is there anything that you look at when you look at this that you think is just crazy?
No, I think we did a fantastic job because we're amazing. If I had to pick one thing, though, Northwestern's resume is great, but as a basketball historian, take a team that's never, ever, ever, ever made the tourney and to give them a 9 seed, like, I hope they get in at some point, and maybe this is the year, but, like, history is not on their side.
Nope. And Salika?
I don't think there's anything that jumps out at me that of teams that should be or should not be in here that would be in here, although I suppose if I'm looking at teams like South Carolina and SMU, I'd probably be happier if they were a little bit closer to the bubble. But then again, do I really feel that strongly about a team like a TCU or a Dayton yet? Eye test, maybe. Paper, you've still got some work to do.
I'll tell you, when I look at this, I think, given how early we still are in the season, only the beginning of January, pretty much anyone from the 7 line down all the way through the 12s here still has a ton of work to do to get there. I mean, obviously everybody has to keep winning, but any team, even there in the 7 line, seems like Clemson, Minnesota, and USC, I could see falling right out of the field with just a couple losses in a row. And that shows you how crazy things are. As we get towards March, you're going to see that same line that we're seeing at around the 7 line moving down to around the 9 or the 10 line. And we're talking about only 6 or 8 teams that are really up for debate. But I think we did a pretty good job overall. And let me just run through any other final thoughts about what we did here. John T.?
I'm actually going to finish with a question for any of you. John S. had mentioned earlier about Grayson. And in terms of players missing games, my understanding is that the word is missing in terms of it doesn't matter whether it was injury or suspension or other. But if one of you can clear that up, I think that's very important.
And that's my understanding of it as well, is that when the actual committee is evaluating this, they just, if they're missing a player, it doesn't matter why. But David, you had a...
Well, it's my understanding that missing is the key term, but it isn't so much for the team that's missing the player as it is the team that they're playing. So in other words, if you beat Duke without Grayson Allen or without any sort of key player, you're not going to get as much credit as another team that beat Duke when they had all their key players.
Virginia Tech.
Yeah, Virginia Tech. And as the saying goes, you are what your profile is. I've heard those that forecast the committee say that. I've heard people that have been on the actual committee say that. So when they say they take injuries and suspensions into consideration, I don't think they're so much giving teams a break for having a key player out as much as they are evaluating who it is that's playing them and either beating them or losing to them when they do or do not have key players.
Well,
it's probably a simpler way to say that than what I did.
John S., why don't you finish us off here with any other thoughts about what we've put together here?
I was going to actually give a final thought that's going to be in a slightly different direction. Okay. I want to shout out to our colleague Kyle Lamb out in the Buckeye country. I know he had a rough time tonight with Ohio State losing, but probably had a rougher time with the Columbus Blue Jackets ending their 16-game winning streak. But it was a fun ride while it lasted.
John T., I think your team is the one that knocked him off tonight, wasn't it?
A few subway stops away.
All right. Well, then on behalf of myself and David Griggs down there, John Titel, John Salika, I want to thank everyone for joining us. We will have an Under the Radar podcast coming up some point down lower where we will fill in spots 49 through 68, and somewhere way down there on the website, you may even be able to find the bracket that we put together after tonight. But so thanks again for joining us, everyone, and we'll talk to you again real soon.